Welcome back. I'm David the Good, and I have a confession to make. I don't have soil. I have dirt. I have terrible, no good, lousy dirt. Sometimes I'll say dirt in a video and somebody will say, no, don't call it dirt, call it soil. I can't call it soil because it doesn't rise to that level until after today's demonstration. And then it will be beyond soil. It will be super soil. It will be amazing. If you have a patch of horrible dirt and you want to turn it into beautiful soil, today's video is for you. Some years ago, I heard an interview with a lady named Patricia Lanza, and she wrote a book called Lasagna Gardening. I also read a book by a lady named Ruth Stout called Gardening Without Work. And additionally, I watched a great inspirational film called Back to Eden with gardener Paul Gauci. And what they all have in common is a gardening method of deep mulching materials on top of the ground to improve poor soil. Lasagna gardening is probably the most clever name for it, the idea of putting lots and lots of layers on the ground. Back to Eden is similar, but it's generally a lot of wood chips and compost. It's not necessarily the layers of a lasagna garden. And if you want to get really simple, Ruth Stout just threw lots and lots of straw on the ground to crush out weeds. But the concept is the same. Instead of digging down into the soil to build your garden, you go up. In today's video, we are going to take a patch of weeds and turn it into a beautiful little garden that will turn my dirt into wonderful soil. And it's a project that you can do in a very short period of time. If you've got an hour or so in an afternoon, you can build a lasagna garden and you can start growing food right away. The first thing you've got to do is cut the grass or the weeds in this spot. You're just going to knock it down to the ground. Doesn't matter how you do it. I have a scythe, which is really, really fancy, but you could use a machete, you could use a lawnmower, or you could probably just go out there and stamp the stuff down. The idea is to just get it shorter so you can stack materials on top of it. If you have tall, rough stuff, it's not gonna work as well. So just chop it down and we're gonna have that layer of stuff and all the seeds on the weeds and whatever there, it's gonna rot beneath the ground and it doesn't matter. The next thing I like to do is put down a layer of something nitrogenous. In this case, I have some cow manure from our cows. If you go and get manure from a farm, I've warned people before, I will warn you again, be very, very careful because there are long-term persistent herbicides that are often sprayed on hay and on pastures, and it passes through in hay and it passes through in manure, and it can even be in straw, and these persistent herbicides will destroy your garden. So get clean manure. I know that sounds crazy, but get clean manure if you can. I have manure from our cows, which I know are on pasture that's not been sprayed, and they're not being spread any hay that might be from pastures which were sprayed. So this manure goes down in the ground, and I filmed it in 120 frames per second, and I'm spraying it with a hose so you can see what it looks like when you spray manure with a jet from the hose in 120 frames per second. Wetting the ground is important before you put a layer of mulch on top of it. Mulch will hold in water, but it also prevents water from coming down from the sky and getting into the ground. It'll hit the top of the mulch and it'll take some time to filter down through into the actual ground. So it's very important to soak the ground really well when you start to make sure that the soil is moist underneath. Otherwise, you may have dry soil trapped underneath that takes a long time to get wet. Once I have my manure and the weeds chopped down, it's time to put a layer of cardboard on the ground. Just Get cardboard from whatever store you can get, strip the tape and take the staples out of it, and then just lay it down. Alternately, you can use newspapers, but I don't know of anybody that has newspapers anymore except for hoarders. So if you have a local hoarder, help them clean out the pathways in their house and just take some of those huge mounds of newspaper and build lasagna gardens out of them. It's a great way to recycle copies of the Sun Sentinel from the 1980s. Do you want to go see Mom? All right, she wants to see you. Is it still running?
Yeah.
All right, just go see Mom. Love you, sweetie. Where are we? This cardboard layer will keep grass and weeds from coming back. It will keep the sunlight from getting to them, and they're just going to get smothered underneath. So this is your weed block layer. You could use a lot of different things for weed block, but if you've ever pulled up that old landscape fabric or plastic from the ground and all those shreds, you don't want to do that. You want something that just rots into the ground. So anytime I can use something natural, like semi-natural, like cardboard, I use it. In the tropics, when we had lots and lots of banana leaves, and we had leaves from various heliconias and giant gingers and cannas and things like that, we would chop them and actually use them for weed block layers. I've even used palm fronds and laid them down as a thick weed block layer to just exclude them and keep them from coming up through and just crush them out beneath. And eventually that layer will rot down and feed the soil as well. It only has to last long enough for the plants beneath to smother and become soil. Let's consider this the pan of your lasagna. This is the bottom. Now you've got your weed block layer. So we're gonna grow up from here by throwing down various layers. If you have seedy, weedy material, this is the point where you can throw it down. I have some really seedy construction hay that I know wasn't sprayed, but it's got lots of seeds in it that I don't necessarily want coming up in my gardens. So I'm putting down a hay layer first and just spreading this out, knowing that those seeds are not going to germinate because there's going to be more layers on top. So we're starting with a seedy layer. This is probably more of a brown layer than a green layer. If you're familiar with composting, everything always grows better out of your compost pile. And so lasagna gardening is basically a compost pile. Brown layer, green layer, brown layer, green layer. Brown layers are higher in carbon, green layers are higher in nitrogen. This is mostly a brown layer because it's old, dry hay. As you go, if you have dry materials, soak them. If you want to take a big barrel and set it up and just stuff materials into it to soak and then pick them up and throw them on the ground, that works great too. But I'm just going to spray with a hose over and over again. My next layer is one that I'm very privileged to have because of where I live. I live out in the country, so I can keep chickens. And my chickens are little composting fiends. We throw in lots of material for them to eat. They get kitchen scraps. We'll even get those uncoated paper plates. And if we don't want to do dishes or we want to have a picnic, we have a birthday party, the paper plates, whatever rib bones are left on them, whatever, all that stuff goes out to the chickens. The chickens turn it, the chickens manure it, the chickens make compost for me. I have this biologically rich, nitrogen-filled soil that I can just scrape out of the chicken coop and load up and throw through here. So we would consider this a green layer, but it's also kind of an inoculant layer because it's adding more life to it. I'm continuing a green layer here. It doesn't really matter that much. Greens, browns, whatever. Don't get hung up on it. You can use just about anything. But my next layer here is some winter rye and clover that I'm using as a cover crop. My son CJ has a outdoor blacksmithing station and he makes these little sickles. So I'm using one of these little sickles to gather up clover and winter rye, and this is a nice fresh green layer, nice spring growth. This is just more to feed the lasagna and to be delicious for microorganisms and the roots of the plants that we're going to plant in it. I like to have a good nitrogen layer because the next thing we're putting on our wood chips. We got a ton of wood chips, literally tons of wood chips, because my friend Liz saw these guys cleaning the road and she got a bunch of wood chips, and then she sent them over to my place to drop a lot of wood chips. So I have lots and lots and lots of wood chips that have been sitting since before Christmas and just sitting and rotting and getting full of fungi. There's a lot of life already forming in there, but they're mostly carbon. This is a brown layer. This is not seedy material, so as we're moving towards the top, we're covering up the stuff below, and there's not going to be enough light for the weed seeds or clover seeds or whatever else to germinate. So we're going up to wood chips now and just packing them on. Along with the wood chips, I'm going to throw a little more green material that I know isn't seedy. This is perennial peanut hay, which I got from a friend of mine. Perennial peanut is a nitrogen-fixing leguminous plant that is used for fixing poor soil, and it's also used as a good ground cover and a grazing material for animals. And so my friend has 13 acres of perennial peanut that he grows and bales as hay, and we feed it to our cows, but we're sparing a little bit of it to throw into this mix and add a little more green to our wood chips. If you don't have peanut hay, if you don't have wood chips, if you don't have winter rye and clover, don't worry about it. Just mix up a broad range of material. I've used seaweed, I've used alfalfa pellets, I've used fall leaves, I've used chopped material from the garden. We've even taken a garden bed that wasn't particularly productive, thrown a whole bunch of kitchen scraps and yard waste on top of it for a year and just piled up a big mound. And then we ended up harvesting Seminole pumpkins out of it because the Seminole pumpkin guts from one of our dinners ended up mixed into all this mess, and it grew all over the yard. So that area became a super rich area. The next year or two, we didn't have to feed it anything because it was all full of this rich, crumbly soil. So don't get hung up on the details of it. Just grab what you can. You got grass clippings, use it. If you've got leaves, use them. If you've got stuff that blows around, like maybe paper shreds or your oak leaves, that sort of thing, throw something on top of it that will pin it. A little bit of wood chips, maybe some pine needles on top, maybe some rough straw that you've wet down, and soak things really well as you go. Every layer, soak it and it'll hold together better. You're making a lasagna and you want it to all glue together. When you're done making your lasagna, you should have a bed that's at least about a foot tall with all kinds of different layers in it, with that cardboard down on the bottom. So now it's time to plant into it. I have planted in seeds, and I have planted in cuttings, and I have planted in transplants in the past. This time I'm using transplants. We have some chittlepin peppers that my daughter started from seeds that she got from Scott Head. In order to put these transplants in, I don't want to put them directly into the mulch. So I go in and get some potting soil. And then I make a hole right through the lasagna. Just open it up, get down to that weed block layer, and take something sharp and puncture through it. Normal people might use a trowel. I use a machete because a machete is the best gardening tool ever invented. And I just poke it through there, punch holes in it. This way the roots can go down through, and it's not going to really let the grass and stuff grow up through, not with how much you've got on top of it. Especially when those roots start coming down. Everything is just going to crush that layer. You just open it up a little bit so the roots coming down can get into the native soil. Fill up that pocket with your potting soil or with compost or whatever loose soil that you have. You can even go dig soil out of your garden or something, but know that it's going to have more weeds in it. The potting soil does not. You put a little pocket there and then plant your transplant into it and water it in. And that's how easy it is. So we're planting the chittlepins in here, and we're also planting sweet potatoes. I got some sweet potato slips, and they're just gonna stick in here, and sweet potatoes absolutely love mulch. If you've ever grown sweet potatoes in deep mulch, you know what I mean. They pull out these beautiful, almost clean sweet potatoes because they'll just grow everywhere through that mulch. And with all the nitrogen that we have in here, it's not going to yellow them out and make them have trouble. You may hear that putting a bunch of wood chips down will rob the nitrogen out of the soil, and that's true. But we're layering it up like a compost heap, so we have a good mix of brown and green materials, which keeps that from happening. The long-term soil improvement that you get from a lasagna garden is quite impressive. You're putting this big compost pile, which is slowly rotting down into the ground, and what happens beneath it as the fungi, the bacteria, the beetles, the worms, all that soil life starts working its way through, is that the ground beneath darkens up and gets richer and looser. We put over a foot of materials in my yard in Tennessee, which was hard, rocky clay, and it started to get loose and brown and moist and rich beneath that foot of material. And that was just some straw, some fall leaves, some coffee grounds, and some wood chips that we got from the town, and just dumped it down there and waited, and over time it got loose and spongy and excellent. In the second year is where you'll really see changes taking place in the soil beneath. It gets richer and darker, and it just gets better and better. But you'll also see the top of your lasagna garden start to sink. So if it starts to sink, just grab more mulching materials and throw them on top. So long as you keep mulching materials on top of it, you're not going to have problems with weeds. So whatever material you've got that you can throw down that is not weedy, just put it on top and keep it up above the ground, and it's slowly going to work its way down into the ground beneath, because you've got all that biological activity and the worms and the roots and everything, and it's just a matter of top dressing it with whatever material you have available. Fall is a great time to gather fall leaves and just put layers on top, and that feeds the ground as well. If you have a bad patch of ground, if you have hard soil, if you have some weeds you want to crush, lasagna gardening is for you. It makes a massive difference in what you can grow, and it's really easy and satisfying to just put a little patch in. You don't even have to have borders on it, but you could do it in a raised bed, you could do it in a container, or you could just do what we did and lay it right on a piece of ground covered in weeds, not ever have to worry about digging it, and it is a beautiful no-till system that starts to enrich the ground, bring in lots of biological life, and it gives you the instant satisfaction of having a garden, particularly if you plant it with transplants. Boom, there's your garden, already mulched, already beautiful, and the soil gets better and better over time. You can learn more about lasagna gardening in the links below. I'll put links to Paul Gauchi's work, and Ruth Stout's book, and Patricia Lanza's book, and of course, I cover this and many other methods of soil improvement and composting in the book, Compost Everything, The Good Guide to Extreme Composting, and I'll put a link to that below as well. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll catch you all soon, and until next time, may your thumbs always be green.
This world is a terrifying place, so I try, yes I try, yes I try, yes I try to keep a smile on my face.
Fire ants! Oh my gosh, man, that's a lot of fire ants.